They said I came back from deployment broken, that the military had damaged me beyond repair, that I'd never amount to anything in the real world. But nothing prepared me for the moment. I walked into my brother's startup office wearing civilian clothes for the first time in months, and his CEO looked up from the conference table and said, "Ms. Rodriguez, we've been waiting for you. You're our new board chairwoman." And just like that, my family's voices stopped echoing in my head. They said I came back from Afghanistan broken, that 3 tours had damaged me beyond repair. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you, that I'd never amount to anything in the real world because all I knew was following orders and carrying a rifle. But nothing prepared me for sitting at my parents' dining room table 6 months after my discharge, listening to my own father tell me I was a disappointment, while my younger brother nodded in agreement from across the table. "Look at Marcus," Dad said, gesturing toward my brother with his coffee mug. 2 years out of college and he's already working for a tech startup in Silicon Valley. Making real money. Building a real future. And you? His eyes landed on me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. "You're 28 years old with no marketable skills, living in our basement, collecting disability checks for problems that are probably all in your head." The words hit like shrapnel, each one finding its mark. My mother said nothing, just stared at her hands folded in her lap, the same hands that used to pack care packages for me overseas. Marcus shifted uncomfortably but didn't defend me. Why would he? In their eyes, he was the success story, the one who'd chosen college over combat, stability over service. "The military broke you, Elena," my father continued, his voice softer now but somehow more devastating. "And I don't think you're ever going to be whole again. Maybe it's time you accepted that and stopped pretending you're going to make something of yourself." I know some people think family betrayal has to be dramatic. Screaming matches, slammed doors, dramatic exits into the night. But sometimes it's just a quiet assassination over morning coffee. Sometimes it's the people who are supposed to believe in you most telling you that your sacrifice meant nothing, that your service was just an excuse to avoid real responsibility. Sometimes it's your own father looking at your Purple Heart on the mantelpiece and seeing failure instead of courage. But what happens when the room stops echoing with their voices and starts listening to yours? What happens when the world discovers that the broken veteran they wrote off has been building something they never saw coming? I sat there in that kitchen, surrounded by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and felt smaller than I ever had in a firefight in Kandahar. Because enemy bullets might kill your body, but family disappointment kills something deeper. It kills the part of you that believes you deserve to be seen, to be valued, to be more than the sum of your scars. My father's words hung in the air like smoke from an IED blast, choking out everything else. "You need to face reality, Elena. The military took a bright, capable girl and gave us back someone who can't even hold down a part-time job at the grocery store. Maybe it's time to apply for permanent disability and just accept your limitations. Accept my limitations." As if serving 3 combat tours, leading a platoon through some of the most dangerous territory in Afghanistan, and earning commendations for valor were limitations. As if the sleepless nights and hypervigilance were character flaws instead of the price I'd paid for their freedom to sit in that comfortable kitchen and judge me. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just nodded and excused myself from the table, walking to my basement room where my dress blues hung in the closet like a ghost of who I used to be. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that while they saw a broken soldier collecting disability checks, I'd been building something in the shadows. Something that would change everything they thought they knew about failure, about worth, about the girl they'd given up on. What test? Let me show you what happened next. I hadn't stepped foot in Marcus's world in over 8 months. Not since the awkward family dinner where he'd mentioned his big tech job while carefully avoiding eye contact with me. But here I was, standing outside the gleaming glass towers of downtown San Jose, staring up at the building that housed Innovate Tech Solutions like it was enemy territory I was about to breach. The lobby smelled of expensive coffee, leather furniture, and the kind of ambition that came with venture capital funding. My combat boots, the only decent shoes I owned, made soft thuds against the polished concrete floors as I approached the reception desk. The same floors where successful people in tailored suits discussed million-dollar deals while I sat in my parents' basement applying for grocery store positions that never called back. This time I wasn't here for a social visit or family obligation. I was here because Marcus had finally reached out after months of silence, his text message brief and almost clinical. "Elena, need to talk. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 2 p.m.? It's important." No context, no explanation, just an address and a time. I'd almost ignored it. After all, the last conversation we'd had was him agreeing with Dad that I needed to, quote, get realistic about my future prospects. But something in the formality of his message, the way he'd used my full name instead of the childhood nickname, Lena, made me curious enough to make the 2-hour drive from Mom and Dad's house. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and a smile that probably cost more than my monthly disability check, looked up from her computer screen. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Marcus Rodriguez," I said, suddenly aware of how out of place I looked in my thrift store jeans and faded army t-shirt. "He's expecting me." She typed something, waited, then looked up with a slightly confused expression. "I'm sorry, but Marcus is in a board meeting right now. It's running longer than expected. Would you like to wait in the lobby or—" "I'll wait," I said quickly, not wanting to give myself an excuse to leave. She gestured toward a cluster of modern chairs near floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the Silicon Valley sprawl. I settled into one of them, feeling like an imposter in this temple of innovation and success. Around me, people in expensive clothes talked in hushed tones about user acquisition, market penetration, and funding rounds, a language as foreign to me as Pashto. 20 minutes passed, then 40. I was starting to wonder if Marcus had forgotten about me entirely when I heard a familiar laugh echoing from the hallway. My brother's voice, confident and animated in a way I hadn't heard since before I enlisted. "The board loves the new security protocols," he was saying to someone I couldn't see. "Honestly, the ideas are so innovative. I'm not even sure how she comes up with this stuff. It's like she thinks 3 steps ahead of every possible threat scenario." I froze. She? Marcus was talking about someone's security work, and there was genuine admiration in his voice, an admiration I'd never heard him express about anything I'd done. Part of me wanted to sink deeper into the chair and become invisible. Here was my brother, thriving in this world of tech and innovation, praising someone's work while I sat in the lobby like a charity case waiting for scraps of his time. But another part of me, the part that had kept me alive through 3 combat tours, started paying attention. Security protocols. Threat scenarios. Someone who thought 3 steps ahead. Those weren't random business terms. Those were concepts I lived and breathed for 7 years in the military. The conversation grew louder as they approached the lobby, and I caught fragments. Revolutionary approach to cybersecurity, military-grade thinking, and the board meeting next week is going to change everything. I straightened in my chair, suddenly alert in a way I hadn't been since leaving Afghanistan. Something was happening here, something bigger than a simple family check-in. And for the first time in months, I felt that familiar tingle of anticipation. The same feeling I used to get before a mission when all the intelligence was pointing towards something significant. Marcus appeared around the corner, still deep in conversation with a tall man in an expensive suit. When his eyes met mine across the lobby, his expression shifted from animated excitement to something I couldn't quite read. Surprise? Nervousness? Or maybe something else entirely? "Elena," he said, walking over with the suited man trailing behind him. "Thanks for coming. There's someone I need you to meet." The tall man in the expensive suit extended his hand with the kind of confident smile that came from closing million-dollar deals before lunch. "You must be Elena. I'm David Chen, CEO of Innovate Tech Solutions. Marcus has told me so much about you." I shook his hand, noting the firm grip and the way his eyes assessed me like he was calculating something. Behind him, Marcus shifted his weight from foot to foot, a nervous energy I hadn't seen since we were kids, and he'd broken Mom's favorite vase. "Actually," David continued, "I was hoping we could all sit down and have a conversation. There's something we need to discuss." He gestured toward a conference room with glass walls that offered no privacy but gave the illusion of transparency. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus, would you mind joining us? As we settled into leather chairs around a sleek conference table, I caught Marcus staring at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. There was something different about him here. More polished, more confident than the kid who used to hide behind me when Dad got angry. But there was also something else, something that made my instincts prickle with the same alertness I'd felt before dangerous missions. David folded his hands on the table and leaned forward slightly. Elena, I'll cut straight to the point. We've been having some issues with our cybersecurity consultant, and Marcus suggested that maybe you could help us understand if we're being taken advantage of. I'm not sure I follow, I said, glancing between them. I don't know anything about cybersecurity beyond basic military protocols. Marcus cleared his throat, his voice carefully neutral. The thing is, Lena, this consultant has been charging us enormous fees for what she claims are revolutionary security solutions. But some of the team is starting to wonder if her methods are actually legitimate. The way he said legitimate made something cold settle in my stomach. There was an implication there, a suggestion that felt familiar in the worst possible way. David nodded, his expression serious. The truth is, we think she might be running some kind of sophisticated con, using military jargon and concepts to impress investors while delivering substandard work. Marcus mentioned that you'd be able to spot inconsistencies in her approach, given your background. I stared at them both, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place with horrible clarity. What's her name? This consultant? Elena Rodriguez, David said, without missing a beat. Same last name as you and Marcus, actually. Quite a coincidence. The room went silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. I could feel my heart rate spiking, the same physiological response I'd had under enemy fire, but this was different. This was worse. Because enemy combatants were honest about their intentions to destroy you. You brought me here to discredit myself, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. You hired me as a cybersecurity consultant, took my work, and now you want me to denounce my own methods so you can avoid paying what you owe. Marcus's face flushed red. Lena, it's not like that. Don't. I held up a hand, my military training kicking in to keep my voice level and controlled. Don't lie to me, Marcus. Not here. Not about this. David's smooth smile never wavered. I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're simply asking for your professional opinion on work that we've already paid for. Surely you can see the ethical implications of overcharging for services, especially from a company that's trying to create jobs and innovation. Ethical implications. I repeated the word slowly, tasting the bitter irony. You want to talk about ethics? I stood up, my chair rolling backward with more force than necessary. Both men remained seated, but I could see the tension in their shoulders. The way David's hands had moved closer to his phone, the way Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes. I designed a comprehensive cybersecurity framework for this company, I said, my voice carrying the authority I'd once used to command soldiers in life-or-death situations. I created protocols that could protect your data, your clients, and your intellectual property from threats you haven't even imagined yet. And now you want me to call my own work fraudulent so you can, what, get out of paying my fees? Elena, Marcus started, but I cut him off. No, you don't get to Elena me. You brought your sister into your workplace to humiliate her. You set up this entire meeting to trick me into confessing to fraud I didn't commit. I looked directly at David. And you thought, what? That the broken veteran would be grateful for the attention? That I'd be so desperate for approval that I'd destroy my own reputation to make you both feel better about trying to steal from me? The silence that followed was deafening. Through the glass walls, I could see other employees glancing our way, sensing the tension even if they couldn't hear the words. Finally, I smiled, not with warmth, but with the cold satisfaction of someone who just identified the real enemy in the room. David Chen leaned back in his chair, his polished veneer slipping just enough to reveal something sharper underneath. Look, Elena, I understand you might feel defensive about this situation, but let's be realistic here. You're a former soldier with no formal education in cybersecurity, no industry certifications, no corporate experience. The work you submitted is impressive for someone with your background, but it's not enterprise level. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus nodded along, his earlier nervousness replaced by something that looked like relief, as if David had just given him permission to finally say what he'd been thinking all along. "Lena," Marcus said, his voice taking on the same patronizing tone Dad used when explaining why I needed to be more realistic. "David's not trying to hurt you. We're trying to help. The cybersecurity field is incredibly complex, with standards and protocols that take years of specialized training to understand." I felt that familiar sting, the same one I'd felt sitting at my parents' kitchen table. The dismissal wrapped in concern, the belittling disguised as guidance. But this time was different. This time they weren't just attacking my worth, they were attacking my work. "Professional grade," I repeated slowly. "Tell me, Marcus, what exactly makes someone qualified to assess cybersecurity threats? A computer science degree? An MBA? Or maybe actual experience identifying and neutralizing threats in high-stakes environments?" David interjected smoothly. "Formal education, industry certifications, peer review, and proven track records in corporate environments. The kind of credentials that give boards and investors confidence." "And what are your cybersecurity credentials, David, since you're so qualified to judge my work?" His smile tightened. "I have an MBA from Stanford and 15 years of experience building tech companies. I understand what investors and clients expect from security solutions." "That's not what I asked." I turned to Marcus. "What about you? What qualifies you to determine whether threat assessment protocols are adequate?" Marcus squirmed. "I'm not making that determination. I just know that in this industry, credentials matter. The team has concerns." "The team?" I let out a short laugh. "You mean the team of engineers who've never had someone actively trying to kill them? Who've never had to identify threats in real time, while lives hung in the balance?" David's patience was wearing thin. "Elena, military experience and corporate cybersecurity are completely different fields. The threats, the technologies, the implementation strategies." "You're right," I said, cutting him off. "They are different. In the military, when you miss a threat, people die. In corporate cybersecurity, when you miss a threat, companies lose money. Guess which environment produces more rigorous threat assessment?" I walked to the window, looking out at the Silicon Valley sprawl. I spent 7 years learning to think like the enemy, to anticipate attacks from angles no one else considered. I've identified improvised explosive devices hidden in trash piles, recognized insurgent communication patterns in cell phone traffic, and developed counter-surveillance techniques that kept my entire unit alive through 3 combat deployments. Turning back to face them, I continued, "But you're right. I don't have a piece of paper from Stanford that says I understand security. I just have 7 years of experience, keeping people alive in the most dangerous places on Earth." The room was quiet, except for distant keyboard clicking from beyond the glass walls. David and Marcus exchanged a look, the same look Dad and Marcus shared when they discussed my limitations. "Elena," David said finally, his tone shifting to boardroom kindness, "I respect your service. But passion and military experience don't automatically translate to expertise in corporate cybersecurity. The protocols you've developed show promise, but they need refinement by professionals who understand protecting intellectual property in competitive business environments." "Refinement," I said quietly. "Yes, which is why we think it's best if you stepped back and let our internal team take over. We'll compensate you for your initial consultation, but, moving forward, we need solutions developed by certified professionals." Marcus nodded eagerly. "It's really for the best, Lena. You can use this experience to pursue formal training, get certified, build credentials. This could be a stepping stone." I looked at my brother and saw someone I barely recognized. The kid who used to beg me to teach him knots and build forts had grown up to become someone who could politely explain why his sister wasn't qualified for work she was already doing. "A stepping stone," I repeated, gathering my things slowly. "Right." As I reached the door, I turned back one last time. "Just out of curiosity, who are you planning to hire to replace me?" I didn't argue. I didn't slam the door or make a scene. I just nodded once, collected my dignity, and walked out of that glass conference room with my head held high. But the moment I reached my car in the parking garage, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from pure, concentrated rage. They thought they could steal my work and then convince me to discredit myself. They thought the broken veteran would be so grateful for any attention that she'd sabotage her own credibility to make them feel better about their theft. But here's what Marcus and his CEO didn't understand about military training. We don't just learn how to follow orders. We learn how to gather intelligence, analyze threats, and execute strategic operations. And right now I was treating this like a mission. I drove to the nearest coffee shop and opened my laptop, my mind already shifting into the methodical, analytical mode that had kept me alive in Afghanistan. If they wanted to play games with my livelihood, then I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. First stop, corporate records. Innovate Tech Solutions was a privately held company, but their business registration, partnership agreements, and financial filings were partially public. It took me 20 minutes to pull their basic corporate structure, and what I found made my pulse quicken. David Chen was listed as CEO, but he wasn't the majority owner. The company was backed by Meridian Venture Capital, with a board of directors that included some heavy hitters from Silicon Valley. More importantly, they'd received $15 million in Series A funding just 6 months ago, specifically for cybersecurity solutions. I pulled up their website and marketing materials. There it was, featured prominently on their homepage. Revolutionary cybersecurity framework, military-grade protection for enterprise clients. The language was almost identical to the proposal I'd submitted, the same threat assessment methodology I'd developed, even the same implementation timeline I'd outlined. But it got worse. I found their press release from 2 weeks ago announcing their breakthrough cybersecurity platform that would change how companies think about digital protection. They'd scheduled a major presentation for potential clients next Friday, promising to demonstrate their, quote, proprietary threat detection system, my threat detection system, my methodology, my work. I scrolled through their social media accounts and found Marcus posting enthusiastically about the company's innovative approach to cybersecurity and, quote, game-changing technology that will revolutionize the industry. The comments were full of congratulations and requests for more information about their quote, 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 documents. Our quote, quote, Misashin Ain Madi. Quote, 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 quote. Innovate Tech had billed 3 major clients over $200,000 each for, quote, comprehensive cybersecurity assessments using what they called their proprietary Rodriguez protocol. They'd named my own system after my family name, probably thinking it sounded more legitimate than admitting they'd hired an actual Rodriguez to create it. But here's where it got interesting. The payment records showed that all 3 clients had specifically requested military-grade security analysis and, quote, threat assessment by personnel with combat experience. Innovate Tech had marketed my military background as their primary selling point, then tried to dismiss that same background as irrelevant when it came time to pay me. I opened a new document and started creating a timeline. Every email exchange with Marcus, every contract negotiation with David, every piece of work I'd submitted. I had copies of everything, because 7 years in the Army had taught me to document every operation, every decision, every communication that might matter later. The more I dug, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't just about dismissing me to avoid paying my fees. This was about stealing my intellectual property and using my military credentials to legitimize their theft, then discarding me before I could become a liability. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that because I was struggling financially and emotionally, I wouldn't have the resources or the knowledge to fight back. They'd underestimated the very strategic thinking abilities they'd been selling to their clients. I picked up my phone and started making calls. First to a lawyer who specialized in intellectual property theft. Then to a journalist who'd written about veteran employment discrimination in the tech industry. Finally, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in months, my former commanding officer, Colonel Sarah Martinez, who now worked in cybersecurity consulting for the Department of Defense. "Elena Rodriguez," she said when she answered, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I was wondering when you'd finally call. I've been hearing some interesting rumors about your work in the private sector." "Ma'am," I said, "I think I need some advice. And possibly some backup." My breath caught in my chest as I stared at the email that had just arrived in my inbox. The sender, Patricia Blackwood, Senior Partner at Meridian Venture Capital. The subject line, "Urgent, board meeting tomorrow, your presence required." But it was the opening line that made my hands shake. "Ms. Rodriguez, we apologize for the communication breakdown. As the primary architect of the cybersecurity framework that Innovate Tech has been presenting to investors, your input is essential for tomorrow's board review." I read it 3 times before the words fully sank in. They knew. Somehow, Meridian Venture Capital knew that I was the real creator of the system David and Marcus had been pitching as their own. My phone rang before I could process what this meant. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice that greeted me was warm and professional. "Elena Rodriguez? This is Patricia Blackwood from Meridian Venture Capital. I believe you just received my email." "Yes, ma'am. But I'm confused. How did we know about your work?" Patricia's laugh was knowing. "Elena, we've been tracking your methodology for months. When Innovate Tech first pitched us their revolutionary cybersecurity framework, we ran it through our standard due diligence process. The approach was so sophisticated, so clearly rooted in real-world tactical experience, that we knew it couldn't have originated from their team." I sank into my chair, my mind racing to catch up. "You knew they didn't create it?" "We strongly suspected. David Chen has an MBA and 15 years in business development. Marcus Rodriguez has a computer science degree and 2 years of software development experience. Neither has any background in threat assessment or security operations. But this framework? This was designed by someone who understands how attacks actually work in the field." My throat tightened. "Then why did you fund them?" "Because the work was brilliant, regardless of who created it. But we needed to find the actual architect before we could move forward with our Series B funding. It took some investigation, but we eventually traced the Rodriguez protocol back to its source." "The Rodriguez protocol?" Patricia's voice carried a note of amusement. "That's what they've been calling your system in their presentations. Rather ironic, considering they've been simultaneously claiming you're unqualified to have created it." I was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. "What happens now?" "Well, that depends on you. We have a board meeting tomorrow morning to discuss Innovate Tech's Series B funding proposal. They're expecting to present, quote, their cybersecurity platform to potential clients and investors. But we've decided that the actual creator of the technology should be the one making that presentation. You want me to present my own work? We want you to take your rightful place as the lead architect of this technology. Elena, what you've created isn't just impressive, it's revolutionary. The threat assessment protocols, the multi-layered defense strategies, the predictive analysis capabilities. This could change how Fortune 500 companies approach cybersecurity." I closed my eyes, thinking about the conversation I'd had with David and Marcus just hours earlier. They told me today that my work wasn't professional grade, that I wasn't qualified to understand corporate cybersecurity. "Really?" Patricia's voice carried a sharp edge. "That's interesting, considering they've been using your qualifications as their primary selling point to investors. Military-grade security developed by combat veterans with real-world threat experience. That's been their entire pitch. They've been using my military background to sell the system, while telling me that same background makes me unqualified?" "Exactly. Which is why we think it's time for some clarity. The board meeting is tomorrow at 10 a.m. We'd like you to present your work directly to our investors and explain your vision for the technology's development." I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling of my parents' basement, where my dress blues still hung in the closet like a reminder of who I used to be. "What about David and Marcus?" Patricia's pause was telling. "They'll be there. We believe in transparency, Elena. Tomorrow, everyone will finally understand exactly who created what and who deserves credit for this revolutionary approach to cybersecurity." For the first time in months, I smiled, not with bitterness or resignation, but with the quiet confidence of a soldier who'd just been handed the perfect mission parameters. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of anxiety, but because my mind was operating at full tactical capacity for the first time since leaving Afghanistan. Patricia's call had confirmed what I'd suspected, but it also raised bigger questions. How deep did this deception go? And how long had Marcus been planning to cut me out? I spent the hours before dawn doing what I did best, gathering intelligence. First, I accessed my old email accounts and pulled every communication I'd had with Marcus about the Innovate Tech project. What I found made my blood run cold. The initial contact hadn't been Marcus reaching out to his struggling sister for help. It had been a calculated recruitment. 3 months ago, Marcus had sent me a casual text. "Hey, heard you're looking for work. My company might need some security consulting. Nothing fancy, just basic stuff." Interested. But buried in my deleted emails, I found drafts he'd never sent. Drafts that told a very different story. "Elena, I know you've been struggling since coming home, but I think I found a way for us to work together. David's company needs someone with your background to develop threat assessment protocols. This could be your chance to prove you're more than just a damaged veteran." He deleted that version and sent the casual one instead. The manipulation was surgical in its precision. I dug deeper into Marcus's social media accounts, going back months before he'd ever contacted me. In February, he'd posted about attending a, quote, cybersecurity innovation conference, where the keynote speaker had discussed the untapped potential of military threat assessment in corporate environments. The very next day, he'd started asking targeted questions about my military experience on our family group chat. But the smoking gun was buried in LinkedIn. Marcus had connected with David Chen just 3 days after that conference, and their early message exchanges were still visible. David had written, "Your sister's background could be exactly what we need. Military veterans with combat experience in threat identification are incredibly valuable in the cybersecurity space. Think she'd be interested in consulting work?" Marcus had replied. "She's been struggling with civilian transition, probably desperate enough to work for cheap. I could present it as me throwing her a bone." I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. This wasn't just theft, it was a long-term con. They hadn't stumbled into stealing my work. They'd specifically targeted me because of my military background, my financial struggles, and my family relationship with Marcus. Then I found something that made my stomach drop. A group chat between Marcus, David, and 2 other Innovate Tech employees from 6 weeks ago, right after I'd submitted my completed framework. "David, Rodriguez protocol is beyond what we expected. This is Series B material, maybe even IPO-level intellectual property. Marcus, she has no idea what it's worth. Still thinks this is a small consulting gig. Unknown user. What's our exit strategy? She's going to expect ongoing payments if this takes off. David. Simple. We document some performance issues, question her professional competence, then transition to internal development. She's a veteran with PTSD living in her parents' basement. Who's going to believe her over us? Marcus. Family angle helps. I can position it as concern for her mental health. She's not ready for this level of responsibility. David. Perfect. By the time we launch, she'll be completely discredited. I screenshotted everything, my hands trembling, not with fear, but with the focused rage of someone who'd just identified the enemy's entire battle plan. But there was more. Financial records showed that David had already filed preliminary patents for cybersecurity methods and systems under his name, using my technical specifications. They'd been planning to steal my intellectual property from the moment I signed the consulting agreement. The most damning evidence was a recording I found on Marcus's cloud storage, a conversation between him and David discussing how to manage the Elena situation after my work was complete. "She trusts me," Marcus said on the recording, "always has. She won't see it coming until it's too late to fight back." I closed my laptop and looked around my basement room. They thought they were dealing with a broken, desperate veteran who would be easy to manipulate and discard. Tomorrow's board meeting was going to teach them otherwise. I spent the remaining hours before dawn building something I'd learned to construct in Afghanistan, an airtight case that would leave no room for denial or misdirection. Every deleted email, every recorded conversation, every financial document that proved their conspiracy to steal my work and destroy my credibility. But I also built something else, the presentation they never expected me to be capable of giving. I created a comprehensive breakdown of the Rodriguez protocol that went far beyond what I'd originally submitted to Innovate Tech. I outlined advanced threat detection algorithms, predictive analysis systems, and multi-layered defense strategies that made their current understanding look elementary. Because here's what Marcus and David had failed to grasp. What I'd given them was just the foundation. The real innovation was still in my head. At 8 a.m., I drove to the Meridian Venture Capital offices in Palo Alto, wearing the one professional outfit I owned, a navy blazer and slacks I'd bought for job interviews that never panned out. But this time felt different. This time, I wasn't walking into a room as someone begging for a chance. I was walking in as someone reclaiming what was already mine. Patricia Blackwood met me in the lobby, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, with the kind of commanding presence that made me stand a little straighter. "Elena, thank you for coming. Before we go upstairs, there's something you should know. David and Marcus arrived an hour ago. They have no idea you'll be presenting today." "Good," I said, and meant it. The boardroom was everything I'd expected from a major venture capital firm: floor-to-ceiling windows, a massive conference table, and 10 of the most powerful investors in Silicon Valley. At the far end of the table, David and Marcus sat with their presentation materials, both looking confident and relaxed. That confidence evaporated the moment I walked into the room. "What is she doing here?" David asked, his polished demeanor cracking for the first time since I'd met him. Patricia smiled coolly. "Gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Elena Rodriguez, the actual architect of the cybersecurity framework you've been presenting as your proprietary technology." Marcus's face went white. "Patricia, there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Elena was just a consultant who created every single element of what you call the Rodriguez protocol," Patricia interrupted, placing a thick folder on the table. "We've done our due diligence, Marcus. We know exactly who designed what, when they designed it, and how you've been misrepresenting both the work and its creator." I stepped forward, connecting my laptop to the presentation system. "David, Marcus, since you're both here, I thought you might want to see what the Rodriguez protocol actually looks like when it's explained by someone who understands the underlying methodology." The next hour was the most satisfying of my professional life. I walked the board through every component of my cybersecurity framework, explaining the tactical reasoning behind each protocol, the real-world threat scenarios that informed the design, and the advanced capabilities that could be developed from this foundation. But more importantly, I showed them the evidence. Emailed timestamps proving I'd developed every concept months before joining Innovate Tech. Technical specifications in my handwriting that predated any contract with David's company. And most damning of all, the recorded conversations where Marcus and David discussed how to steal my work and discredit me personally. "The Rodriguez protocol isn't just named after my family," I said, advancing to my final slide. "It's named after the person who created it, me. And what Mr. Chen and my brother failed to understand is that what they stole was just the beginning. The real innovation, the advanced applications, the next-generation capabilities, those exist only here." I tapped my temple. "And they never will belong to anyone who tried to destroy me to get them." The silence in the room was absolute. David sat frozen, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume. Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes, his earlier confidence replaced by the look of someone who'd just realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. Patricia stood up, her smile sharp as a blade. "Gentlemen, I think we have everything we need to make our decision about Series B funding." The decision came faster than I'd expected. Within 20 minutes of my presentation ending, Patricia called an executive session. David and Marcus were asked to wait in the lobby while the board deliberated behind closed doors. I didn't have to wait long to understand the outcome. When the boardroom doors opened, Patricia emerged with a document in her hand and a smile that told me everything I needed to know. "Elena, the board has voted unanimously to terminate our partnership with Innovate Tech, effective immediately. We're also prepared to offer you a direct contract as Chief Security Innovation Officer for Meridian's portfolio companies." Behind her, I could see the board members still seated around the table, several of them shaking their heads in what looked like disgust. Through the glass walls, I watched David pacing frantically in the lobby while Marcus sat slumped in a chair, his phone pressed to his ear. "What does that mean for them?" I asked, nodding toward the lobby. Patricia's expression hardened. Innovate Tech loses their current funding and any possibility of Series B investment. Without our backing, they'll also lose their existing clients, most of whom specifically contracted for military-grade security developed by combat veterans. When they discover the actual veteran was pushed out while 2 civilians took credit for her work, she shrugged. The tech industry doesn't forgive that kind of deception. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a notification. A tech industry news site had just published an article titled "Stolen Valor: How a Silicon Valley Startup Built Its Business on a Veteran's Stolen Work." The byline belonged to the journalist I'd contacted yesterday. Connolly Helly's dead. The story was comprehensive and damning. Screenshots of the deleted emails, transcripts of the recorded conversations, testimonials from Colonel Martinez about my military cybersecurity work, and quotes from Meridian Venture Capital about discovering the fraud during their due diligence process. Within an hour, the story had been picked up by 3 major business publications. My phone started ringing with interview requests from podcasts, news programs, and industry magazines. LinkedIn notifications flooded my inbox as cybersecurity professionals shared the article with comments like, "This is exactly why we need more veterans in tech," and finally, someone exposed this kind of exploitation. But the most satisfying moment came when I walked past the lobby on my way out. David was shouting into his phone about damage control and legal options, while Marcus sat in stunned silence staring at his own phone screen, probably reading the same article that was destroying his reputation in real time. He looked up as I passed, and for a moment our eyes met through the glass. I didn't stop walking, didn't acknowledge him, didn't give him the confrontation he probably expected. I just kept moving forward, briefcase in hand, toward a future where my work would finally be credited to the person who actually created it. The broken veteran they'd tried to exploit was walking out as the Chief Security Innovation Officer for one of the most powerful venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's succeeding so completely that your enemies become irrelevant. 6 months later, I stood in my new corner office on the 32nd floor of a San Francisco high-rise, looking out at the same Silicon Valley landscape that had once seemed so foreign and unwelcoming. But everything had changed. Not just the view, but how I saw myself in it. The Rodriguez Protocol had become the gold standard for enterprise cybersecurity. Fortune 500 companies were implementing my frameworks, and 3 major tech firms had licensed my threat detection algorithms. The work that Marcus and David had dismissed as not professional grade was now protecting billions of dollars in digital assets. But more than the professional success, I'd discovered something I'd lost somewhere between Kandahar and my parents' basement: my sense of purpose. Leading Meridian's cybersecurity initiatives felt like commanding a unit again, except this time I was protecting corporate infrastructure instead of soldiers' lives. The personal costs had been significant. Marcus and I hadn't spoken since the board meeting. Our parents, initially confused by the media coverage, eventually understood what had happened, but the family damage was probably permanent. Marcus had moved back home after Innovate Tech collapsed, and family gatherings had become exercises in careful avoidance. David Chen had landed on his feet, of course. He'd started a new consulting firm and was already pitching investors on his extensive experience in cybersecurity innovation. But his reputation in Silicon Valley was permanently tainted. The tech industry had a long memory for ethical failures. The real transformation came 3 weeks ago, when I received a call from the Department of Veterans Affairs. They'd read about my work and wanted to discuss developing cybersecurity protocols for protecting veterans' personal data. The same military background that my family had seen as a liability was now being recognized as essential expertise. "We need someone who understands both technology and the unique security challenges veterans face," the VA representative had explained. "Someone who's been on both sides of service, active duty and civilian transition." Last Tuesday, I testified before a Senate subcommittee about cybersecurity vulnerabilities in government systems. The same woman who'd been told she was too damaged for the real world was now advising lawmakers on national security issues. But the moment that mattered most came last weekend. I was visiting my parents when Dad mentioned seeing my interview on the local news. He didn't apologize. That's not who he is. But he said quietly, I didn't understand what you were building, Elena. I should have trusted you. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with weapons or strategies. They're fought with persistence, integrity, and the courage to rebuild yourself when everyone else has written you off. Sometimes coming home from war means finding a new mission worth fighting for. And sometimes, the family that fails you isn't the only family you'll ever have. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.